In this series, I go bit by bit through the Lord of the Rings films in the extended edition and try to explain all references and differences to Tolkien's books in detail. In the last episode, we finally left the Shire and Buckland. Link and also the playlist are in the description. In the film, we would now enter Bree, but in the books there are still 3 chapters between this. Some of you might know what's coming next. The hobbits will go through the old forest and meet Tom Bombadil. Luckily, I covered Tom's nature already in my last video, so I can focus more on the story and especially things I have forgotten there. So maybe this is a bit of a Who is Tom Bombadil Part 2 video. As always, spoiler warning. I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it, and shoutouts to Kimberly80 who allowed me to use her amazing artwork. But let's continue with some details I forgot in the past. The hobbits decided to ride through the old forest on their ponies to avoid the east road, where the Nazgul most likely would wait for them. A detail that only made its way as text into last episode, because I forgot it in my recording. The cry of the Nazgul is mentioned multiple times in the books. For the film's Fran Welch, one of the writers of the films and Peter Jackson's wife, was somehow able to produce this sound while she was sick. When they heard it first, they immediately decided to record it. It was probably not good for her voice to do so, but this way we accidentally got this memorable sound for the films. Speaking of Nazgul, I never really noticed, but in this scene with Farmer Maggot, we can see the shadows of 2 riders, even though the scene is shot in a way that you get the impression there is just one, and in the books there's also only one Black Rider mentioned who talks to Farmer Maggot, but of course we know that there are multiple in the Shire, so it would make sense. If this was an accident or not, I could not find out. In episode 4, I talked about if it was possible for Gandalf to turn somebody into a frog. My point does not change, but I forgot to mention one famous transformation from the Silmarillion. The Valar Ulmo, king of the sea, turned Elrond's mother Elwing into a white bird, while she fell down a cliff into the great sea, saving her life. I always imagine a swan, and I would argue this is also referenced later. In this form, she flew with the one Silmaril she inherited to Eärendil, her husband's ship, who tried to sail to Aman. I would not take this event as precedent though, because it was strongly connected to a great fate. It also saved her life and was done by one of the Valar, who are angels of highest rank and among the most powerful entities in Tolkien's universe. I tell the story in more detail in my History of the Elves video. There's another little detail that I noticed recently. Gandalf bumped his head at the ceiling in Backend. I thought it could be an The Empire Strikes Back reference, where Luke Skywalker happens the same in Yoda's hut. The circumstances are also quite similar. A normal-sized man in a far too small house. Roles aren't verted though. Gandalf is more like Yoda. Also, as explained in my Tolkien in Star Wars video, Star Wars took some inspirations from Tolkien, and also Peter Jackson often references other films like the dolly zoom from Vertigo mentioned last episode, but it turns out it was an accident by Ian McKellen and he just continued acting, so Peter Jackson decided to keep this scene in the film. Now we finally come back to the story. Fredegar Bolger stays in Buckland and pretends to be Frodo to draw the attention of the Nazgul to him, a very dangerous but important task. He is not ready to leave the Shire, in contrast to Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin. To leave the Shire, the hobbits have to pass the hedge, which was planted to protect Buckland from the old forest. There's a secret tunnel under it, and Merry has the key for it. How he got it, we don't know, but of course he's a Brundybug and his family founded Buckland, so it makes sense that he has access to the key. I always wonder if there are spare keys for it, because Merry probably takes it with him. Also, the word key is not explicitly mentioned in the books, but we can read that Merry unlocks a gate. Maybe it's just a secret mechanism though. The books now explain a few things about the Old Forest. It's a very mysterious and dangerous place, especially at night. The trees there seem to be conscious and full of hate for everything that can walk freely. They are probably Huorns. An argument for this is that the forest was once connected with Fangorn because everything was a gigantic primordial forest once. We see this partially hinted in this map of the Second Age from the announced Amazon series. Merry explains that the trees can even move and once came very close to the hedge and leaned over it, but the hobbits came and cut down hundreds of trees and made great bonfires to burn all the ground. After that, the trees kept their distance to the hedge but were also very angry. Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin strayed for a while through the forest on their ponies. The books describe this in a lot of detail and build up this mysterious atmosphere of the woods. It's similar to what we later see in Fangorn, and we also have an old forest scene referenced there in the movies. We come to this in a moment. After a while, the hobbits see an unusual and old willow in the distance and suddenly become very sleepy. Merry and Pippin try to sleep a bit at its trunk, while Frodo sits down on a root, putting his feet into the waters of the Withy Windle, a small river that flows through the old forest and merges with the Brandywine. He wants to rest a bit, but also falls asleep and even falls into the water. It looked almost like a root of the tree would try to drown him. All this seems a bit reminiscent of the enchanted river from The Hobbit. Only Sam can resist the sleepiness and hurries to help Frodo out of the water. Someone in the comments of the Tom Bombadil video suggested that he maybe could resist because he was closer to nature as a gardener, or maybe because he saw Frodo in danger. We don't know, but he saves the day. Frodo comments on how the root knocked him into the water, and Merry and Pippin are drawn down through a crack under the trunk of the willow. The tree itself is the source of the sleepiness, not the water, and it tries to kill the hobbits. This scene is referenced in Fangorn in the Two Towers film. I think it's only in the extended edition though. Frodo and Sam panic, thinking of a way to rescue their friends. They only have a small hatchet, which does not help. So they decide to make a fire, but this makes the willow only more angry and it starts to slowly squash Merry and Pippin. Frodo runs a bit away and cries for help until he suddenly hears someone singing, but the text seems to be nonsense. It, however, also seems to be enchanting or magical. It's a strange man singing, hopping and dancing. He wears yellow boots, a blue jacket and a hat with a feather. Frodo and Sam confront him and ask for help, and he introduces himself as Tom Bombadil. He agrees to help them, puts carefully down the white water lilies he's carrying and runs to the tree that he calls Old Man Willow. He starts singing into the crack and then commands the tree to let them go, and to the wonder of all, it works. In the scene in Fangorn of the Two Towers film, Treebeard says some of his words: eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. As explained, Fangorn and the Old Forest were once connected, so this reference has another interesting layer. However, it seems Tom's words and songs have power over the world. We can read how the wind silences, or how Old Man Willow kicks the two hobbits out after Tom commands him to. The hobbits thank the strange man who invites them to his house for supper, mentioning his wife Goldberry. He also mentions her in one of his songs earlier. In this we learn that Goldberry is the daughter of the River Woman. All this is very mysterious and also a bit absurd. Tom does not really seem to fit into the world. While the Old Forest is an extremely dangerous place for the hobbits or most other beings in Middle-earth, he dances and sings through it almost like a child, but is fully unaffected by the hatred and evil of the forest, like he is beyond everything. As explained in my Who is Tom Bombadil video, the Shire itself is a place that does not fit into the time of Middle-earth, which is usually ancient or medieval, while the Shire is Victorian, so an anachronism. We talked about that in detail in the second episode too. The Old Forest next to it also doesn't really fit into the world. It seems like a haunted forest from a fairy tale with strange beings inside. When the hobbits reach Tom's home, it even becomes stranger. When I read it the first time, it felt a bit like a dream or another unusual place inside the forest. It seems evil has no space or power in here. When the hobbits eat with Tom and his wife Goldberry, who also seems not human but also not elvish, Tom puts the ring of Frodo on his finger, but he does not become invisible. The ring has no power over him at all, which is an indicator for Tom's immense power. He even inverts the ring's effect by making the one ring invisible in a flash instead and suddenly making it appear again like in a little magic trick. He gives it back to Frodo and smiles, who is curious too if this is a real ring he got back. He puts it on his finger himself and indeed he becomes invisible. Sam, Merry and Pippin can't see him anymore. When he tries to sneak out of the room, Tom asks where he is going, so he can clearly see him while he is using the one ring. What's interesting, it shows that Tom can see the unseen and that inside his realm the ring suddenly isn't as dangerous anymore. Gandalf warned Frodo to never use the one ring, but here it seems to be no problem and no danger anymore. It's like Tom's home is a bubble inside a bubble and Sauron has no power here. Tom is also not affected by the evil will of the ring, which shows that he is just on another level if we compare that to, for example, Gandalf's reaction when Frodo offered him the ring. Goldberry also gives us some hints towards Tom's nature. I personally think he is the embodiment of the music of the Ainur. I recommend my Who is Tom Bombadil video for more information, because this discussion would go beyond the scope of this video. Goldberry seems to be something like a nature spirit herself, representing the seasonal changes of this region. At least that's what Tolkien said about her in his letters. Frodo hints at that she has an elf-like voice, but is clearly very different from the elves. In addition, we learn that the elf lord Gildor, who the hobbits met in the Shire, see episode 5, somehow contacted Tom too, which is also a very interesting detail. The hobbits meeting Gildor and then later Tom Bombadil seem very fateful in the context of the books. We further learn that Tom often talks to Farmer Maggot, which makes the farmer even more interesting. Tom has his news from outside the world from Mr. Maggot, which adds a new layer to him. He has a good relation with an entity that is probably even more powerful than Sauron himself and tells him what's going on in the world. Of course, Farmer Maggot is something like a neighbor, but again, considering how dangerous the forest is, this also seems very unusual and makes Maggot quite special and mysterious too. However, after 2 days of resting at his house, Tom teaches the hobbits a song which they should sing if they are in trouble, and he further explains how they get past another dangerous place called Barrow-downs, east of the Old Forest. The Barrow-downs are another special or unusual place that does not fit into Middle-earth in their current state as cursed burial mounds. Once in the first half of the Third Age, Arnor, the northern kingdom of the Dún-Edain in exile, it was the brother kingdom of Gondor, split into 3 separate kingdoms. One of those was Cardolan, and the Barrow-downs were used as graves for their lords and kings. In that tradition, they also placed funerary goods there, like Numenorean weapons and trinkets. The Witch King of Angmar started a long and devastating war against those kingdoms, allied with one and destroyed the other 2 in the end. When he destroyed Cardolan, he summoned evil spirits there with the power or knowledge he got from Sauron to haunt this place. I assume so that the surviving people could not hide there. With this, Cardolan was completely abandoned, and this cursed place was haunted by these evil spirits known as barrow-wights for about 1,400 years. What those barrow-wights are exactly is very mysterious, like Tom Bombadil too. As mentioned before, this is another unusual place with very strange residents, and it's right next to the Old Forest. east of it. So the Shire, the Old Forest and the Barrow-downs are all very unique and unusual places and right next to each other, which is in my opinion no coincidence. It must also be considered that Tolkien wanted to create mystery or an enigma here. The concept of Tom Bombadil, Goldberry and the probably evil spirit imprisoned inside the tree called Old Man Willow are also very old concepts from as early as 1938, around the release of The Hobbit, maybe even older, so they were on Tolkien's mind far before he even started writing The Lord of the Rings and are probably inspired by Celtic mythology. Interestingly, in the Barrow-downs part also lies a detail that Tolkien uses far later in Return of the King again, and it's also referenced in the extended edition of the films. We come to this in a moment. But back to the hobbits. After some days of rest, they leave the Old Forest on their ponies over the Barrow-downs and try to stick to Tom's description and warnings. Maybe this film scene here shows the Barrow-downs area, but of course in the books Aragorn is not there. I could be wrong though. In the book Unfinished Tales, we can also read that some days prior, the Black Captain of the Nazgul stayed in the Barrow-downs for some time, rousing the barrow-wights and commanding all evil beings in and around the Old Forest to be on the watch for the hobbits. A very interesting detail. On their way around the barrows, the hobbits took a small break and ate. After it, they all became very tired, not by magic, but by the conditions. A nice day, being outside, laying on the grass, and a good meal. And they all fell asleep. When they woke up again, they were shocked at how long they have slept. Now they can't make it out of the Barrow-downs before the sun goes down. As it became darker, also a very dense fog appeared and they lost the orientation. The chapter is called Fog on the Barrow-downs and now we know why. A very dangerous situation. At some point Frodo called for his friends but got no answer. Frodo strayed around and heard a muffled cry in the distance, and then a weird voice was calling for him. He trembled and fell on the ground, seeing a tall figure like a shadow with dim glowing eyes. It looked like the light of the eyes was shining from a far distance. Frodo described the touch of the shadow entity as cold and freezing his bones, and he became unconscious after it. The barrow-wights brought the hobbits inside the barrow, and magic was cast to slay the hobbits, probably as some kind of sacrifice. Frodo could hear a weird song calling for the Dark Lord and the death of sun and moon. However, Frodo woke up and could resist the spell long enough to sing the song Tom had taught him. And after a short silence in the distance, he heard a song answering. Like a force of nature, there was a loud rumbling sound, as of stones rolling and falling. Tom basically crashed through the wall, at least that's how I imagine it. Quote, "There was a loud rumbling sound, as of stones rolling and falling, and suddenly light streamed in, real light, the plain light of day. A low door-like opening appeared at the end of the chamber beyond Frodo's feet, and there was Tom's head, feather and all, framed against the light of the sun rising red behind him." I think this could also be referenced in the first Hobbit film when Gandalf turns the three trolls into stone. It's however different in the book. Tom, who arrived on his own pony called Fatty Lumpkin, bent the barrow-wights and cleansed the barrows and everything that was in it of evil with his powerful songs and the sunlight, breaking the curse. He also carried all the funerary goods on top of the hill. And now we come to the little important detail I mentioned earlier. For each of the hobbits, he chose a long, leaf-shaped dagger. These are powerful Numenorean weapons. In the film, Aragorn gives some weapons to the hobbits at the Weathertop. However, these daggers in the books are special and become important again, because Merry stabs into the heel of the Witch King in Return of the King with this dagger before Eowyn kills him one and for all. This dagger is not enough to kill him by itself, but one of the few weapons in Middle-earth during the Third Age, not in the hand of lords and kings, that can actually hurt and even weaken the Witch King. Cardolan had to fight against Angmar and the leader of the Nazgul, so those weapons had to be useful in combat even against a ring wraith. It's really a fateful event that Merry got this dagger here, which was also chosen by Tom. In addition, Tom also chose a brooch set with blue stones for Goldberry, and he says that now he and Goldberry will remember the woman who once wore it, probably a lady of Cardolan. It seems he knows or can see the past or memories of these items. He also makes some hints towards the future, and that the hobbits can use these daggers as swords, and that they will help them in the east, south, and darker and more dangerous places, which references their further journey in my opinion. Tom also recommends the hobbits to go to the Prancing Pony in Bree, not Gandalf, which again has a very fateful connection, as we will see in future episodes. If you have seen episode 4, we learn that in the books Gandalf does not say to Frodo go to Bree, he just tells Frodo to go to Rivendell. Of course, this is different in the films, and this change makes sense without the Old Forest part. Tom on Fatty Lumpkin accompanies the hobbits on their ponies to the last part of the East Road to Bree. He thinks that his land ends here and he will not pass the border. They say goodbye and the hobbits continue their journey to Bree. And now we finally return from this mystical journey of the books back to the story of the films. Thank you for watching. We made it, we are finally in Bree after just 2.5 hours. This episode covered a lot of things that are not in the films, but I hope you still found it interesting. I also hope it was not boring, because I covered Tom last video already, but I tried to add new information. In case you enjoyed it, please press the like button and leave a comment. I read and answer almost everything. If you should decide to subscribe, consider pressing the stupid bell if you want to get notifications. Next episode will be most likely a lore video again, not sure on the topic yet. To bring back some variety, it will be most likely not the next episode of this series. I pretty much burned through all my notes and the research I did some weeks ago for the series, so I can't promise to keep it up with weekly releases now, but I'll try. I also think about a new Need for Feedback video, but we will see. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.